All right, good morning. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today we're going to be talking about universal design for learning in the digital classroom. It would be great if you had up your group chat. If you're not so familiar with Zoom, there's a group chat and you'll be able to communicate with me there. You can go ahead and type right there any questions, and I have it up and I'll do my best to address them as we go along, or I'll address them at the end. For participants, you'll see your name there, and you'll be able to do things like raise your hand and show me a little like green check mark if you agree with something, anything like that. Awesome. So I see Rosa's testing out the raising hand feature. If anybody else wants to test that out, you can raise your little blue hand. And so we'll kind of do some participation stuff that way as well, so that you can be engaged both with the little hand raising and in the group chat. All right, awesome. Okay, so my name is Naomi Church, and I have started a company called Growing Minds Consulting. A little bit about me. I have been in education for 17 years. I spent 10 years in the classroom in public education in elementary. I taught inclusion, so that means that I had a lot of students with disabilities in my class. I have two kids of my own. I have a third grader and a fifth grader who are in Broward County Public Schools. For those of you who are out of state, that's around Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So that's the picture of the beach there. That's where I live. Not quite on the beach, but pretty close actually. I got my master's in educational leadership from Florida State University. Go Seminoles. And yeah, my passion is universal design for learning, basically making educational opportunities equitable for everybody, and math. I absolutely love math, so that's why you see that image there with mistakes allow thinking to happen. So this idea of growth mindset and math and UDL all kind of comes together to be my perfect storm. So, Growing Minds Consulting is an educational consulting company offering professional development for educators, administrators, and districts, consultation services to schools, and specialty tutoring around the South Florida area for students and families. We also provide pre-recorded or live webinars to share information in digestible bites for easy implementation. And these can be used at faculty meetings, PLCs, and other formats that meet your needs, and they can be customized to meet the needs of your organization. All right. We're going to start with a little engagement activity. So I'm going to go in here and lower your hands for now. And what you're going to do is raise your hand to be able to participate with this. So I know we have some different audiences here. So if you are a teacher, go ahead and raise your hand. You can raise your little blue hand in participants. So next to your name there, you'll be able to find your hand. If you can't, you can always just type right into the chat pod me, so you can participate either way. All right. Now, let me know if you are a school or district administrator. All right. Okay, I'm gonna lower the hands now. How many of you use Canvas in your daily work? Awesome. So Canvas is the learning management system that we use in Broward County, and it's my favorite one. So when Canvas asked me to come out and give this presentation as a keynote, I was pretty excited. But anything that I'm talking about will absolutely be relevant in other learning management systems if you're using them. Okay, how many of you have heard of differentiated instruction? Awesome. All right, the hands are going crazy there. Nice. Okay. How many of you have heard of universal design for learning? All right, a lot of people also. Fantastic. How many of you actively integrate the principles of UDL into your physical classroom back when you were able to be in one? All right, awesome. We have a couple people who've been able to do that. How many of you consciously integrate principles of universal design for learning into your digital learning environment? All right, a little bit less there. Yeah, so that's what we're going to be talking about today, and hopefully give you some tips to be able to help you with that and kind of better understand what UDL is if you don't already know. All right, so let's start with why this is so important. Ooh, there we go. All right, so universal design for learning is a scientifically valid framework for guiding educational practice that provides flexibilities in the way information is presented. So that's one thing that we'll be talking about, presentation, in the ways students respond or demonstrate knowledge and skills, so proficiency, and providing appropriate and in the ways that students are engaged. So we'll be talking about those three things: representation, action and expression, and engagement. The UDL also reduces barriers in instruction, provides appropriate accommodation, supports and challenges, and maintains high achievement expectations for all students, including students with disabilities and students who are limited English proficient. And so the important part here is that universal design for learning is really for everybody. It's for every student, and we'll definitely be coming back to that. So, before I do that, I'm going to show you a number and I want you to remember it. So don't cheat. I know that you're at home and you probably have a pen and paper. Don't write it down. All right. So, because that kind of ruins the whole point of it. So don't write it down. I'm going to leave it up for a brief bit and I want you to do your best to memorize it. Okay. Here we go. So again, no writing it down, just memorize it. All right, now that it's gone, you can grab a sticky note or, type it for yourself. And I want you to write down what the number is now that it's not there anymore. And you can even go ahead and type right into the group chat what you think the number was. All right, we have some little differences there. All right, awesome. And we're going to come back to this. So, moving on for now, the goal of universal design for learning is really to maximize learning for all students. So UDL is for every child, whether they're gen ed, special ed, gifted, or English language learners. It's not a special ed initiative, which is a very common misconception that it's something that we do for those kids. But instead, it's a philosophical approach for designing curriculum, shaping instruction, selecting instructional materials and technology, and developing assessments that provide greater access to learning for all students. This is particularly of interest right now when what we have are all of our students in remote learning, even ones who didn't sign up for it, right? So when you're teaching in a virtual school, those students signed up to be virtual students. And right now, with the shutdown, our students really didn't sign up to be remote learners, and most of you probably didn't sign up to be remote instructors. And so we really have to think about how can we make the best out of the situation that we have and still reach and teach all of our learners. So I love this. There's no formula or recipe that works for all learners in all times. There is no set of lesson plans or units that can engage the range of learning styles, approaches, and intelligences that are likely to gather in one classroom. So there's not going to be a silver bullet. There's not just going to be, unfortunately, one thing that works for everybody. But with intentional planning through universal design for learning, we can really expand our reach and try to meet the variety of learners that we have in our classrooms. We have students that come to us with varying strengths and interests, different goals and life experiences. Right now, where they're learning from home, they're in different types of homes, right? With different amounts of people in their home, different amounts of technology. And so it can be especially challenging because there's even more variability than we would normally see. So you can raise your hand if you've seen this image before. It's a pretty popular image in education. I know a lot of people have seen it. And in the first image, it's assumed that everyone will benefit from the same supports. Here, they're being treated equally, right? So I like to call that teaching to the average or teaching down the middle. In the second image, individuals are given different supports to make it possible for them to have equal access to the game. Here, they're being treated equitably. So this is the image that I like to use for differentiated instruction. So basically, oh, you need less support, I'm going to pull back. You need more support, I'm going to give you more, right? And so differentiated instruction is great. It's amazing, but it's really hard to do. It can be very hard to do online to be able to meet every student's individual need that way. So what if instead of differentiated instruction, instead we took away the systematic barriers? So in the third image, all three can see the game without any supports or accommodations because the cause of the inequity has been addressed. And this is really what UDL strives to do. So we look at anticipating what the barriers are and removing them from the start. Because if I can be proactive and remove some of those barriers, then I don't have to differentiate for as many students. Oh, I love that, making the fence clear so all can access the way that they are. Thanks, Terry. So UDL doesn't happen by happenstance or luck. It happens by intentional design. And there's a difference between having good intentions and being intentional, right? A lot of you are in public education. If you're in education at all, you have good intentions. Most people are overworked and underpaid, especially now, where it's hard to kind of draw the line with working from home, and we end up sort of working all day. So we have good intentions, but that's not the same as being intentional with what we're doing. So a lot of this comes from Katie Novak and her book UDL Now. So this is my favorite UDL book. So if you were going to pick one up and you haven't already, this is a great one. So Katie Novak gives an analogy when she talks about UDL. So let's imagine that you are throwing a dinner party and you've invited a bunch of guests, and some have food allergies, some are gluten-free, some are vegetarian or lactose intolerant, and your brother is exclusively doing the paleo diet. And to be the perfect host, you want to accommodate everyone. So what you could do, which would be what differentiated instruction is to make everybody their own individual meal. If you made everybody their own individual meal, you can guarantee that it will meet their needs, right? So for the vegetarian, I'm not going to put any animal products on that plate. For my friend who's gluten-free, there's not going to be anything with gluten in his meal. But that's a lot of work. And especially now, we don't have time for it and it's exhausting. So what if instead of making everybody their own meal, we put out a buffet of options? So at your dinner party, if you put out a buffet, then guests are able to choose what works best for them. And so if they're diabetic, then they can make choices that are appropriate for their own health needs. So this mirrors what we see in the classroom, right? We have all kinds of diverse learners. We have English language learners, students with dyslexia, students with attention deficits, and like I mentioned earlier, students who are living in all different kinds of situations and maybe sharing their access to technology at a time like this. So UDL offers students a buffet of learning options. The options are offered by the teacher, but they aren't individualized for specific students. So you don't have to be like, oh, this one's for John. Oh, this one's for Bob, right? You put the options out there, but you don't have to specify for each student. So through the UDL framework, students are intended to become self-directed learners and choose the options that work best for them, not the other way around. With UDL, students learn to take responsibility for their learning. So I like this image here, and basically the idea with this is that we start with universal design for learning. We start by eliminating barriers, being proactive with universal design. Then there may be some students who are not quite self-directed yet and maybe are not making appropriate choices. And for those students, I can differentiate, right? But I won't need to differentiate for all of my students. It's a lot more realistic to differentiate for a couple or a handful of students than it is to differentiate for everybody. And then on top there, what you see is SDI, which stands for Specially Designed Instruction. And specially designed instruction is unique to students with disabilities who have an IEP, an individualized education plan. And so that is specific supports that are geared to meet their needs. But those kids, we can also do universal design for learning because they're going to benefit from the same supports that everybody does. So let's unpack UDL a little bit. So the U is for universal. So this is curriculum that can be used and understood by everyone. People have access to it. There aren't as many barriers to that curriculum. So providing genuine learning opportunities for every student. Learning. So I'm going to skip over to the L. So when we consider learning in UDL, we need to think about what, how, and why. What knowledge do we want students to obtain? How are students going to interact with the new ideas? What skills or strategies could they potentially exercise as they work to solve problems? Why should they care? Why should they prioritize your activity over everything else that's grappling for their attention? To develop truly engaged learners, to plant the seeds that will help students become lifelong learners, we need to plan to address knowledge, skills, and enthusiasm. So that's all in the design, in the learning piece of it. So now let's move on to the D for design. So universal design comes out of the field of architecture, actually. By developing buildings that are more flexible, architects can accommodate all users regardless of whether they have a disability or not. So with universal design came stuff like curb cuts so that people in wheelchairs could get onto the sidewalk. But then that's also beneficial for people with babies and strollers, and teachers with their giant rolling carts, and people with luggage, and people with bicycles. So it ends up helping all kinds of people, even though it was specifically intended to help people with disabilities. So another example would be closed captions, originally designed for deaf or hard of hearing individuals, but it can also provide additional representation of information for those who can hear. So this allows the user to engage in a way that may be more effective for their learning style. Some people learn better when they can see it and hear it at the same time. So just like with architecture, when you universally design learning, you make it easier for every student in your classroom to achieve. But it has to go beyond access. A lot of people think that UDL starts and ends with accessibility. And while accessibility is certainly an important aspect of it, in my blog post, if you were able to take a look at that, certainly it matters if it's accessible, if people can find what they need, right? But UDL has to go beyond that. And luckily, Canvas specifically as a learning management system has been designed from the ground up to be the most accessible LMS for all learners. So UDL asks teachers to go beyond simply providing universal access to the same material. Instead, you're tasked with building varying levels of support and challenge so that students can exercise voice and choice with how, what, and why they are learning. You're being challenged to design goals, methods, materials, and assessments that work for all students. And that sounds very daunting, but we're going to take a look at some very practical approaches to this. So this is kind of the basis for UDL here. These are the principles of UDL. So the affective network deals with engagement. And so it's basically starting with why. If you're familiar with Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why, this is kind of what this makes me think of, that we really have to provide options that tap into learners' interests and provides appropriate challenge, right? They're not going to do it if they don't see why it's valuable. And now I see a lot of memes with math now, because with talking about the exponential growth of the virus, now math teachers are like, see, I told you you would need this in real life. So even for something like exponential growth, it can be a lot more engaging to look at why this information is so necessary, why I need to know this, how it's applicable in what it is that I'm doing. So recognition networks is representation. So here we're talking about providing options for acquiring and comprehending information. And for this, it can help to think about multiple intelligences. People kind of think of things, respond to things in different ways. And what reaches one person may not reach another person. So when given the choice of watching a video or reading an article, I will always choose to watch the video because I get more out of that than trying to read an article by myself. And then there's the strategic network, which is expression. So here we're talking about providing options to demonstrate learning, because once we give it to them, they need to have a way to give it back to us. So these guidelines I put in the chat earlier, and I'll put there again at the end. These are the 2.2 guidelines from CAST on UDL. And so here it talks about these 3 networks, the why, what, and how of learning, but then also goes deeper. So you can see that first we talk about access, right? Because it has to start with accessibility, but it doesn't end with accessibility. We continue into understanding and then really get into expert thinking, because the goal, after all, of UDL is to create expert learners who are purposeful and motivated, resourceful and knowledgeable, strategic and goal-directed. So let's jump in with multiple means of representation. So this is really the what of learning. So this means providing the information to your students in a variety of ways. So typically we use textbooks. And even if you think about in our digital classrooms, just putting the link to the PDF of the textbook in Canvas or in your learning management system online, right? We run into the same problems. The textbooks are really unimodal in their presentation. They only show things one way. Students with learning disabilities, visual impairments, language related problems, or reading problems can struggle to recognize and interpret print. Students struggle to organize information presented, and of course, students struggle to recognize relevant information when presented. Everything kind of gets lost for them. So providing students with opportunities to receive and interact with content differently can stimulate learning in ways we never thought possible. So for example, the barriers for your students posed by a printed book could include several students may have difficulty actually seeing the printed text. It's a visual issue. A few students struggle to decipher complex academic vocabulary. It's a vocabulary issue. Some students have difficulty decoding multisyllabic words. It's a decoding issue. One student with physical limitations may have trouble turning the pages of a textbook when we're in a physical classroom, right? So we can run into so many problems. So the idea here is that we can present information differently to give everybody access to the same curriculum. So this is an example of a standard. I use Florida standards since I'm in Florida. So if you're not familiar or if you're out of state, the Florida standards are matched very, very closely to Common Core. I think 90% or more of the standards are identical to Common Core. So here, this is a language arts standard in 3rd grade for reading literature. And the standard is about recounting stories, including fables, folk tales, and myths from diverse cultures, determining the central message, lesson, or moral, and explain how it's conveyed through key details in the text. So this standard is not about decoding. And when we have students who can't decode the information, they literally don't have access to it. So we need to be able to present this information to the students in different ways so that they can interact with the real goal of the standard here. So when I'm writing a goal for this, I really want my students to be able to determine that central message, lesson, or moral and explain how we see that in the text, right? And so they can't do that if they can't access the reading. So what do? Well, absolutely, we could post the reading in Canvas or whatever digital platform you're using. There's also a lot of teachers now who are doing read alouds to their students. If you have Zoom or Teams or Adobe Connect or anything else, you can even just video yourself with your phone and post it. In Canvas, you're able to use a feature in there to be able to record yourself, and you can just record yourself reading the fable, folktale, or myth to your students. Hearing it in your voice can make such a difference for them. So you can either do it live or pre-record it, but that's one way to give them access so that they don't have to read it themselves. You may be able to find videos. So on Discovery Education on YouTube, if I'm doing, for example, the tortoise and the hare, I can find videos of the tortoise and the hare, real brief ones, even just 2 or 3 minutes that are showing it that way. I can give my students options with Mayan, Epic, or Learning Ally. These are all online ways to read books where the pictures are there, the text is there, and it will read the text aloud. And so my son, who is in 3rd grade, and he's actually gifted, he is really into math, and he's not such a big fan of reading. So when his teacher assigns a reading and he's able to go into Mayan and have it read to him, he's way more engaged and he actually gets more out of it. And then he's following along with it because it reads at a slower pace instead of him just flipping pages and kind of pretending like he's reading. So Learning Ally is specific for students with disabilities. It's free for students with certain disabilities in the state of Florida. Mayan and Epic are giving away free memberships to teachers right now and students during this difficult time to allow students to access those. It can also just be using something that helps with text to speech. So there are Chrome extensions that do that. So you can get a free Chrome extension, and then whatever text you're putting into Canvas, you can use the screen reader to be able to read it. And then another way would be to post cartoons or infographics. Think in your head like a graphic novel. For some students, when information is presented that way, it works so much better for them. It's more clear. So I want you to take a second to type into the chat pod, how can you provide options for students to acquire and comprehend information? So we should absolutely show it to students, give it to them in more than one way. So maybe when we give them the folk tale or fable that we want them to read, we give them the infographic for it, we give them the video for it, we give them the actual text for it. And whether they look at it all the ways or one of the ways, it's fine. Some students need to be able to see it in more than one way. They need to be able to see the video and hear their teacher read it aloud and read it themselves. And some are good just accessing it in one way. All right, so now let's dig into multiple means of expression. So here is basically where they give it back to you, right? So now that you've presented the information in different ways, we want them to do something with that information. But doing something with that information in a learning management system doesn't always mean just dropping a quiz in there, right? Just a quiz with multiple choice questions, and I know that there's more question formats within Canvas, but I see this a lot where it's just like, read this article, take this quiz. Here's the link to the textbook, take this quiz, right? So trying to think outside of that rut and showing it to them in different ways, but then also giving them more than one way to respond. So within Canvas, when you post a discussion, you can obviously type a response to the discussion, but you can also record it. So you click the little thing that kind of looks like YouTube with the arrow in it. And for students who are not great at typing, or maybe have physical disabilities, or students who can't pay attention long enough to type it out, and so then they lose their train of thought, right? So for all different types of students, they could record their response to a chat. So even that kind of flexibility makes a difference for our students. It allows them to express what they know in different ways. Just with the discussion, they can either type it or they can record themselves doing it. And it's really fun for the kids to kind of see their classmates talking through their response instead of just reading it always. So we can run into some problems when we only do things one way, right? Some students lack strategies to organize, plan, and apply information they receive, and some students cannot physically complete the tasks with the expediency necessary to keep up. And that can be really daunting when everything is in quizzes and discussions. So let's think about moving beyond that. Here's a third grade standards in operations of algebraic thinking that really deals with the properties of multiplication. So if I've been teaching the properties of multiplication, maybe I showed a video on it. I had a great one from Khan Academy or from Learn Zillion, or from studyjams.com, and I was able to show the content. And then I linked to the textbook, and then we had maybe some extra practice that we did together, or maybe I went above and beyond and I did a video call with my students and I showed the problem and talked through it, right? So presenting the information in different ways. Well, now it's time to find out how much of that they really know. So when we just give a quiz or a multiple choice test to students, we obviously run into problems, right? So it could be that they can't read it. I mean, hopefully then they have a screen reader and they can still access those questions. Maybe not. It could be that they just don't care. That's really a thing. It could be that they actually don't know the information. It could be that they didn't have the attention span to sit through the test. So we run into a lot of different problems, and it can be really hard to tease out who actually knows the information from who doesn't. So what if they were able to show you that they know it in ways that play to their strengths? So you have kids who are really charismatic and they're really good at talking, right? So maybe let them videotape themselves teaching a lesson. Then absolutely, I'm going to use that if it's good, right? And if it's actually saying the right information, I can use that and put it in Canvas for future lessons that I'm doing on the topic. Because man, to hear it explained from a classmate instead of from you can be so powerful. Maybe they can make a PowerPoint or a sway or a Prezi and post it there for everybody to see. Maybe they can do it like they're doing a blog post. Maybe they can write a song. Maybe they can make a game. So there's all these different ways that students can show you that they've actually been paying attention and that they understand the information that you presented. And they're going to be a lot more excited to make their PowerPoint or teach their virtual lesson or do their blog post than they are going to be to take a multiple choice assessment. In most cases, for some students, you could actually give them the choice of a multiple choice assessment because some students like that. I mean, admittedly, not a lot, but I definitely have a few who prefer that. So we hold everybody still to the same standard, to the same level of rigor. We make one rubric, and it's super easy. You can do that within Canvas. You have one rubric, you create an assignment, you have a rubric there, and then they can submit in all different formats. They can submit a Word document, a PowerPoint, they could submit all these different things, a link to their recording, and you grade everybody using the same rubric. And so it's not really more work for you, but it's so much more engaging for them. So I want you to take a second to type into the group chat, how can you provide options for students to demonstrate their learning? Okay, so now we're going to talk about multiple means of engagement. So this is really the why of learning, and really the most important. I kind of saved the best for last here. So we know that engagement is important, right? You don't need the bullet points to tell you that when work appears irrelevant or unrelated to life experience or purposes, the kids don't do it. They're not engaged, right? When work requires more effort than feels reasonable, or when subsequent failures have occurred. For a lot of our students with disabilities, they are used to not being successful. And so then it makes it hard for them to want to try again. So students demonstrate greater difficulty comprehending material that is unrelated to their personal life experiences. We know that to be true. We don't need research to tell us that, right? In Florida, my gosh, maybe 8 or 10 years ago, there was an FCAT Rights prompt about a camel. And the students didn't do real well on that because you see in South Florida, we don't have a lot of camels. And so I for sure had students afterwards asking me what a camel is. And then I was like, oh man, this didn't go well. Or we had students writing about Camel cigarettes because that was their only reference for what a camel is. And so they didn't do well because they didn't have any kind of personal context or background knowledge on camels. I mean, it's kind of like in South Florida having students write about a snow day when most of our kids have never seen snow, right? So last year, the 4th grade prompt was something school related. My daughter was in 4th grade last year and she came home really excited and was like, I actually knew what it was about and I understood the articles and everything was about school. So I really knew it and it made a difference. And she actually did well on that one because it was all things that she had background knowledge about. So context that is not understood cannot easily be transformed to meaningful numerical sentences. Appropriate operations and procedures are less likely to be selected. So the point of that is that it matters in math too. It comes down to the word problems that we're giving in math. When we're putting content in word problems that the kids have no prior knowledge of, they're actually less invested in solving that problem, and they're less likely to choose the right procedures and operations to use, which is kind of astounding, right? So students are less likely to persevere on problems that are irrelevant or uninteresting. Well, how do we make math story problems relevant and interesting for students? For one thing, put their name in it. Take that problem right out of the textbook, because I don't know about you, but I don't have time to make up my own problems. So I'm going to take that problem and then I'm just going to put my students' names in it, because I'll tell you what, when the problem is about Naomi, I'm a whole lot more interested in the outcome of that problem. Now I care how many pieces of chocolate Naomi gets, right? And we can also just change the context of the problem. So instead of it being about camels, maybe I'm going to change it to be about puppies, because so many of the kids have pets at home. I can turn it into something that's relevant and engaging for them. Let's take a look at this writing standard. So this standard is about writing opinion pieces. And the thing is that kids are going to do better writing about opinion pieces when it's something that they actually have an opinion about, right? So if I just give them a prompt and tell them what they need to write, they may not do well. They may not have the background knowledge to do well. But if I want them to really practice writing an opinion piece and really selling something from their point of view, or if I'm getting them into debate, then I'm going to give them something that they can have an opinion about. So it's about letting them choose here. Superman is better than Batman, school uniforms, chewing gum in school, math is more important than science, the best animal is. And so letting them write about something that they can be passionate about, something that they want to research. And so when we talked about action and expression, we talked about having students do different things like a PowerPoint or a sway or a video, or right? So not every standard lends itself to that. That is a content standard. So you assess if they know the content, and so they can give you that content in different ways, right? So this standard is more of a method standard. Here, this standard is about writing opinion pieces. So you can't really just make a sway. You actually have to write an opinion piece, because that's the goal of this standard. But I can give you choice in what you write about, or I can give you choice in scaffolds. Some kids like to see an exemplar piece. Some kids do well with a checklist, so they can make sure that they cover everything. Some kids like to use a graphic organizer. So maybe if I've taught my kids thinking maps, I can choose the map for that, right? So there's still options in how we can engage our students. So CAST put out this document, and I had it in the file pod earlier, and I'm going to drop it in there again in case you didn't get to download it, with the top 10 UDL tips for designing an engaging learning environment. So here's their top 10. Support risk-taking, offer time for active reflection on learning and engagement, share examples and non-examples, increase opportunities for collaboration, ensure resources and supports meet the demands of the task, incorporate authentic and relevant examples, provide frequent formative feedback, present flexible assessment options, minimize distractions, and create clear, specific goals. So all of these tips for designing an engaging learning environment can be used in the digital classroom as well. We can do all of these in our digital classrooms. So support risk-taking is really a lot about having a growth mindset, right? Is your classroom, whether it's your digital classroom or your physical classroom, a safe place for students to make mistakes? How do you respond when they take risks and if they get something wrong? Are you praising them for the effort that they put forth and how far they've come and the process, or do they feel like they're being attacked every time they get something wrong, right? And so we can support risk taking even in a digital environment. We can give feedback to our students that helps them to develop a growth mindset. We can give them time for active reflection on learning and engagement. I mean, really at home, they have more time in most cases. We can be flexible with when things are due. Some teachers will assign things and then everything is due on Sunday so that they can kind of work at their own pace. My own kids' teachers have put like assignments for Monday, assignments for Tuesday, assignments for Wednesday. But if they can't get all the Monday stuff done on Monday, it's okay, and they can finish it up on Tuesday. Share both examples and non-examples, right? Because our students need to see what it is and what works in addition to what doesn't. We can give them opportunities to collaborate online. We can do that with the discussion board feature, right? And like I said, allowing them to either type their response or video their response. We can also do that in video chats like Zoom or Teams. We can allow the kids to collaborate that way. They could even collaborate by emailing or texting each other. Ensure resources and supports meet the demands of the task. So if I know something's going to be difficult, like maybe this math concept for 5th grade is particularly difficult, so maybe I'm going to throw up some additional videos for guidance, the Khan Academy one and the Learn Zillion one, and the one from Study Jams, and another resource that I found, right? So I want to put everything out there so that maybe if they didn't understand it this one way, they have something else to fall back on, right? And so all of these things we can really incorporate into our digital classroom that's going to make it more engaging for our students, that's going to make them want to be there and do the work. So we already talked about number 3 here, flexible assessment options, right? Not everything has to be read something and do a quiz or watch something and do a quiz. There can be different ways that they give it back to you. And then I want to talk about number 1 there, which is creating clear, specific goals. So this cartoon kind of illustrates my point. For a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. And so obviously that's difficult, right? The fish can't climb, the elephant can't climb. We have a penguin there, a bird. The monkey's probably going to do real well on that. Could be hard for the seal. So we need to be clear on what the goal is, but be flexible in how people get there, right? So if the goal is to reach the top of the tree, can the bird fly to the top of the tree, right? There can be different ways of achieving the same goal. So it's about knowing your goal, right? Designing a lesson or unit using universal design for learning principles requires you to know your goals. And I don't just mean like the compliance goal that maybe you were writing on your board for your administrator where you just reword the standard. That's not what I'm talking about. By goal, I mean literally by the end of that lesson, what do you want your students to know? What do you want them to be able to do? What do you want them to care about? You can think about the KUDs, know, understand, and be able to do, right? And then, to borrow a line from Stephen Covey, you must begin with the end in mind. How will you eventually assess that students have achieved your goals? How will you be sure that your assessment or grading rubric is designed in a way that it isn't accidentally assessing something else? Are you assessing what you really mean to assess? And then we strive to eliminate barriers. So once you know what your goal is and you have an idea of what you need to assess for, you can begin the process of eliminating barriers to learning. So even though every learner is different, we can predict and plan for common or high probability barriers that may prevent students from learning and enable the curriculum to meet the majority of learner needs in our classrooms. So I know that a barrier I had every year was students reading below grade level. So I know that with digital learning, I have to send parents information about a Chrome extension so that their student can have a screen reader, or I need to give the readings in other ways in like Mayan or Epic so that it can be read to them within that platform. Right? I know that that's going to be a barrier for some of my students. All right, Terry says, some of this requires understanding of the tools for timing and assessments and due dates and the impact of seeing missing or late when assignments are turned in, even as students are told to develop and use a schedule that works best for them and their families in these circumstances. You're absolutely right. So it may be that you assign something on Monday, but you don't put the actual due date in until Saturday or Sunday, so that if they don't turn in the Monday stuff until Tuesday, they don't see this giant red flag that says late. Yeah, that can, especially now when there's a lot of trauma with uncertain circumstances, something little like that can absolutely make a difference and kind of send a kid over the edge. I do professional development for teachers full time. And I even had teachers email me because I put a due date like a week after the assignment, but then really I left the assignment open until I was going to close out the whole course and give the in-service points. And I got like 4 emails from the same teacher saying, but this says late. And then absolutely I realized that I cannot do that. I need to just make the due date at the very end of the course, because some people can't get past that, seeing it late or missing. And so I just had to explain that you still get full credit. It doesn't matter if it's late. And yeah, so if we want to be flexible, we may need to take that out of the equation. That's a really good point. So I want you to take a look at this and take a second to type into the chat pod, what is the goal? So the goal could be the students understand and are able to explain the life cycle of butterflies. Yeah, it could be about life cycle of butterflies and butterfly metamorphosis. The goal here could be about writing a paragraph, right? Is it how to write a proper paragraph? Absolutely. So this is a non-example because we can't really tell what the goal is. If the goal is for the students to write a proper paragraph, then couldn't they write about anything that they want so that they actually know enough about the topic to concentrate on the writing, right? Maybe I have a kid who's an amazing writer, but they keep getting pulled out during science class, so they don't actually know the stages of butterfly metamorphosis. And so then I'm not really assessing that kid's paragraph writing skills. I'm assessing their knowledge of the science content. So this is what I'm talking about with making sure that you're assessing what you actually mean to assess, right? If we're talking about the stages of butterfly metamorphosis, couldn't they make a poster, make a PowerPoint, make a video, Like they could show you that they know this content in different ways so that my students who are reading 2 levels below grade level can still be successful with the task. So that my student who types so slow that he just can't manage to get his stuff done from home isn't stuck, right? I'm giving them a chance to show it in different ways. And so the feedback that I get from teachers a lot is, but we're told to instruct interdisciplinary. And that is absolutely true. A lot of school districts, a lot of classrooms are pushing for interdisciplinary instruction. Interdisciplinary instruction is great. Interdisciplinary assessment is not a thing. You cannot assess both writing and science in the same task, right? And so that's why school districts that have Mastery Connect, so Mastery Connect is under Instructure, it's the assessment platform that in Broward we have it with Canvas. Mastery Connect is great because when you put in a question, you actually have to select the standard that that question addresses. And you can't select more than one standard for the question, because really, can one question be assessing more than one standard? And so I kind of like that it pushes you into really thinking about what standard that's assessing. And so then here's kind of our overview for it. First, we need to clarify the goal, the KUDs, what we want the students to know, understand, and be able to do. We want to be focused and specific. Then we anticipate barriers, the same barriers we know we're going to have. Kids who are reading below grade level, kids with attention problems, kids with low motivation, right? Some of these barriers are not new. And we want to then use the UDL guidelines to design. So we're looking at options for engagement, options for representation, and options for action and expression. And maybe you can't give options for all of those things all the time, and that's okay. If UDL is new to you, you can pick one area and get comfortable first with engagement. Get comfortable with giving kids some choices in how they're doing it, in putting different names in the problems, in letting them choose if they want to do this question or this question, even though both questions are equally rigorous. Letting them have choice of question can make a difference in engagement. Or maybe I'm just going to focus on representation or just action and expression. And I've had teachers come to me and say, oh, I'm really good at representation. I always show things in different ways. I'm just going to focus on action and expression because I'm always giving multiple choice tests. Great. That works too. You don't have to be able to do everything all the time. So here in this visual, the kid in the red hat and the wheelchair says, could you please shovel the ramp? And the guy with the kooky eyes on the shovel says, all these other kids are waiting to use the stairs. When I get through shoveling them off, then I will clear the ramp for you. And then the kid in the wheelchair says, but if you shovel the ramp, we can all get in. So clearing a path for people with special needs clears the path for everyone. So it's this idea that it's essential for some, but it's useful for all, right? Some of the students that you are tasked with teaching may not be able to access the curriculum without some of these measures, but really it's useful for everybody. So now, do you remember the number that I gave you at the start of the webinar? I want you to go ahead and type it into the group chat now. What was that number? All right, you ready to see it and check yourselves? There it is. So a lot of people were pretty close. See, it looks like Jeannie got the whole thing. So some people are able to chunk it and assign meaning to chunks, and it makes it easier to memorize. So for example, my birthday is January 11th. So the 111 right in the middle, I could assign meaning to, and then I don't really have to think about that. That's not something I have to memorize because I'm able to assign meaning to it. And my anniversary is on the 19th. I'm from Chicago, and 23 was Michael Jordan's number, so that's easy for me to remember because MJ. So some people can assign meaning and memorize it. What if I told you that this string of numbers is just a pattern of adding 4 every time, starting with 3? So I have the number 3 and I add 4 to get 7. I add 4 to get 11. I add 4 to get 15. Add 4, add 4. So what would the next number in the string be? Absolutely. The next number in the string would be 27. Well, now I just gave you a strategy. I gave you the strategy of looking for a pattern. So now, if we came back to this 2 days from now and I said, what was that number? So many more of you would get the whole number correct, because all you need to know is that you're starting with 3 and adding 4 every time. So post-strategy benefits, it lessens frustration, right? Just being tasked with memorizing that long number can be frustrating, and that's how some of our students feel. Another post-strategy benefit is it increases efficiency and motivation, right? When you have a strategy, when you have a pattern to look for, we're more efficient at things, and then we're more excited to do it because we know that we're going to be successful, and everyone achieves more. And so this really plays into the idea of essential for some. Like Jeannie was able to get that whole number without knowing that. But, or maybe she found that pattern on her own, but telling people the pattern, teaching kids a strategy, giving them other options makes it useful for everybody. Everybody benefits from that, even though some really need it to be successful. So the purpose of an introduction to UDL is to build curiosity among participants so that they will want to go on to learn more about UDL. So there's so much to UDL and there's so many components. So obviously this was just a really brief introduction to kind of show the difference between UDL and DI because they're not the same thing, and to hopefully show some easy practical ways that you can make some quick changes into your digital learning environment to increase engagement and output from students. So why implement UDL? I kind of love this because so often it seems like we're too busy for the solution. I have too many things on my plate. I can't do this. But what if this is the solution? What if this is what makes everything else easier? Then you don't have to track kids down and keep calling them and emailing them about turning in assignments if it's assignments that they actually want to do. If it's something where they can hear your voice or see your face or see their friends' faces, right? These little things can make a difference. Like even just for my son, being able to use the recording feature in the discussion board instead of typing, that was a game changer for him, right? Now, instead of doing the discussions last, he's doing them first because he's excited to participate in them and share his ideas. He just didn't want to do it because he typed so slow. And by the time he was done pecking out the second word, he couldn't remember the rest of what he wanted to say. So those little things can make such a big difference. And I heard Katie Novak talk in another webinar, and she said that one of her kids was using the speech to text option. So my son has also gotten real good at that, clicking the little microphone in his Chromebook and talking for some things, and it will write it out, you know. And Katie Novak said that one of her kids was like, well, how come he gets to do that and I don't? And she said, well, you can do it too. So basically, with these tools and supports, we don't want to be exclusionary. Even if you are a good typer, maybe you feel like you can get your thoughts out better that day by doing speech to text, right? Even if I am a good reader, but I'm tired because I've been reading so much, or my brother kept me up all night, I can use that Chrome extension with the screen reader where it reads it for me, right? We can make those options available to all students. So, what are the big rocks in your district? You need to think about what are the rocks in your district, and how will implementing UDL help support current initiatives, right? So depending on what district you're in, everybody has different priorities. So in Broward, maybe that we're thinking about Marzano because that's how we're evaluated. Maybe we're talking about project-based learning or interdisciplinary instruction. And all of that can really fall under the umbrella of UDL, because when I'm universally designing instruction, I am also doing all of these things that Marzano or Danielson talk about that people are getting evaluated on. So here's a final thought. I am only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do. And so really think of this with UDL, right? You don't have to master UDL today or tomorrow. You don't have to do it all, but you can pick a piece that you can do, that you can dive into it. You're here, a lot of you, on your day off because you're passionate. You have the power to be the change on your team, in your school, in your district, maybe even in your state. So I'm challenging you to be a risk taker, to learn from your mistakes, to look for guidance when you need it, and to be vocal about your successes. So the resources I got from CAST, and you can find out more at udlguidelines.cast.org. Absolutely, Terry. Also finding a partner to share the journey with. And then this is my website. So it's growingmindsconsulting.com.